Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It's Tuesday. That means another author interview. I am happy to be with you as always. Hope you're having a good week. Hope you had a good weekend. Mine was super quiet. My husband is visiting family, so it was just me and the puppers. And I slept in, I took naps, I read, I crocheted. Yeah, just a very low-key weekend for me and the dogs. And then last night, our water went out, and it was still not on this morning. It's not just ours, it's the whole complex. So not sure what's going on there. It's harder when you don't speak Portuguese fluently, and you can't really call and say, can you tell me when my water's going to be back on? But thankfully I have neighbors who are helpful and told me that theirs was also off. So I'm hoping when I get home in a little bit here, it will be back on. Otherwise, I'll continue brushing my teeth with bottled water and go jump in the pool so I'm not completely stinky. I don't know. TMI. Moving on. Yeah, you're right. Let's talk about a book. I have a returning author today. This is Edward Willett's third time on the podcast. The first two times he was on, we talked about the first two books in his World Shapers series. But in today's episode, we are moving past the World Shapers, although that series is not done. But we're talking about a different book today that is called The Tangled Stars. More than a century ago, the network of masts, that's an acronym, MASTTS, the network of masts, the space-time tunnels that made interstellar travel possible, violently collapsed, the backlash destroying a lot of the solar system's space-based infrastructure. Coop Douglas, a thief and a con man, is in serious debt to outer system crime lord Eric Galeotto. While trying to salvage a valuable chunk of space station destroyed by the backlash, Coop makes a startling discovery. Mast Primus, the tunnel that used to lead to New Earth, is open again. That raises an intriguing possibility. Coop could flee the solar system and his debt to Galeotto and make a new life, and possibly fortune, around another star. Accompanied by his first mate, the wisecracking AI-uplifted, genetically modified cat Tybalt, Coop sets out to liberate the solar system's only remaining functioning starship from an Earthside museum, enlisting the help of Lisa Gray, a former lover-turned-cop on Luna. Along the way, he is pursued by Galeotto and dogged by law enforcement and thugs. And beyond Mast Primus, the tangled stars await. So, that is the description of The Tangled Stars by Edward Willett. As you heard, it is sci-fi. It is a space opera. It takes place in space. Imagine that. It is funny. Oh my gosh, I loved Tybalt, the AI, the cat. He made me laugh all the time. Each chapter starts with a journal entry written by the cat, and he's such a cat. Like, those on social media, you see the videos with the cat doing the Dear Diary or the journal entries. They're a little bit like that, except space themed sometimes. So made me laugh, and he is very cat-like. Coop is a little Han Solo-esque, if you will. You're not quite sure where he stands on everything morally, but you like him. He seems like a good guy, and the adventure the mast is discovered, and then of course Coop concocts this just crazy plan. Oh, I'm going to go to Earth. I'm going to break into this museum in Chicago, and I'm going to steal an entire spaceship from a museum in Chicago on Earth. doesn't matter that I'm a wanted criminal and I can't go anywhere because I will be arrested as soon as I am identified. No flaws in this plan whatsoever. So I've always liked stories that involve a plan that just seems completely outrageous and then somehow works. Doesn't seem like it's ever going to, doesn't seem like it should, but somehow it works. So, of course, he's helped along the way by Lisa Gray, who is a woman from his past. He has the AI in the form of a cat who also has connections to Lisa. If you are a fan of sci-fi, if you're a fan of space opera, you should probably check this out. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and turn to the interview so Edward can tell you more about the process of writing The Tangled Stars. Hey, Edward, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me back.
Thanks for being here. We are going to talk about your new sci-fi novel, The Tangled Stars. Before we get to that, though, for people who didn't hear you before or ho maybe need a refresher, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'll give you the little potted bio I always start with these days, which is Edward Willett is the award-winning author of more than 60 books of science fiction, fantasy, and nonfiction for readers of all ages. That's the one sentence thing. I'm a full-time writer. I've been full-time writing for 30 years. I started as a newspaper reporter, photographer, and then for a while worked as a communications officer for the Saskatchewan Science Center. But I've been freelancing now for, 30 years next year. I'm not quite there yet. I'm the author of about 25 novels in that mass of books. The Tangled Stars is my 12th novel for New York's Daw Books. I've written for a lot of smaller publishers, and then I've also written tons of nonfiction of one sort or another. I've also written plays, and I've written poetry, and just about anything with words I have committed. And as I said, The Tangled Stars is my 12th novel for Daw Books. So my first love is writing science fiction and fantasy. And I also have my own podcast, The World Shapers, where I talk to other authors about writing science fiction and fantasy, the creative process. And that's up to episode 116, I think. And I've also kickstarted 3 anthologies out of that, featuring authors who are guests on the podcast. 2 have come out already. The third one will be out next month. And partly because of that, I also have a publishing company called Shadowpaw Press. Shadowpaw Press has republished some of my stuff that was abandoned by other publishers when they went out of business. But I've also now begun publishing a lot more other authors, some in the same boat. So I have an imprint called Reprise, where I publish new editions of notable previously published work, not just science fiction fantasy by any means. And I also have the premiere side where I publish original stuff. That's where the anthologies came out. And I've got a couple of novels coming out from that are not science fiction fantasy from other authors again in the next few weeks, as well as a picture book, which kind of came out of the blue. And I published that this summer. So it's a fairly eclectic publishing program. And I live in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, and have for a long time, although I was born in the States, but we came up to Saskatchewan when I was a kid. I lived in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, which is a small town, and then moved to Regina, which is the capital. A long time ago now, 1988.
All right. And this is slightly random, but your Shadowpaw Press is named after your cat. Is that correct? I follow you on social media, and you have a cat who I think is named, maybe not. I could be wrong.
Yeah, nope, that's absolutely true. He's Shadowpaw Press. I'm immortalizing him. So, when he's gone, he will still be around because his picture is the logo. So, nice. We got him, and he's named Shadowpaw. Actually, there's a couple of literary connections. Shadowpaw is the kind of name that you get in the Warriors books about cats, which is a children's fantasy series. And my daughter loved those, and she was only 10 years old when we got him. So she named him, and I liked it. And so that's where that came from. And the other thing is that he's actually the nephew of my publisher, Betsy Wollheim's cat, Roscoe. He's a Siberian, and she had a connection with a breeder, and she actually picked him out of the litter. And she and her copy editor drove down to pick him up from Baltimore and drove him up to New Jersey. And I flew down to New Jersey, where my other publisher editor, Sheila Gilbert, lives, and picked him up there and then flew back with him. So he has a literary connection as well.
He is a well-traveled cat also.
Well, he is in his very early years. He was, yes.
Yes. Well, I saw that you posted about his birthday the other day, and he was born on the day I got married. So
There you go.
Anyway, we're not here to talk about the cat. Well, technically we are going to talk about a cat. It just isn't that cat, although it has some similarities to that cat. How many times can I say cat? Let's go to break so I can stop maybe talking about the cat. When we come back, we will actually move on to talking about the book. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with Edward Willett about his sci-fi book, The Tangled Stars. Let's go ahead and return to that interview. Can you give an overview of The Tangled Stars?
The Tangled Stars is a far future humorous space opera heist story with a genetically modified AI uplifted talking cat who eventually becomes a starship captain. That's the way I've been saying it recently. It takes place, as I said, in the far future. It takes place in a world, a universe, I guess, in which there used to be interstellar travel, but it all collapsed. They were sort of, think of them as wormholes. I call them masts, which is multiverse adjacent space-time tunnels. And they went out to other worlds. There was only one out of old Earth system. And something happened. It collapsed when they tried to open a second one, and the backlash destroyed a lot of the spaceborne infrastructure. And we're much, much past that, more than a century past that. And there's still it's a lot like The Expanse in that the people are in the outer planets and the inner planets, and different governments and all kinds of things going on in the solar system. My main character is a bit outside the law. He's a scavenger and really a thief when he can get away with it, and con man. And he's out trying to snatch a piece of the old space station that used to anchor one end of the space-time tunnel. And unexpectedly, it appears that the tunnel has opened, which gets the gears going in his mind. He thinks if he can get the only spaceship left in the solar system that can still navigate one of these space-time tunnels, which is in a museum on Earth, if he can steal that ship, he and his cat, who's his first mate, the aforementioned talking cat, will be able to get out of the system. And he owns massive debts to a really bad character named Galeotto, who's the kind of the outer system crime lord. So that sets the whole plot in motion. He's trying to get back to Earth. Along the way, he picks up an old flame of his, who's currently a cop on Luna, because she has skills that he thinks can help him steal this ship. They steal the ship, and they try to get out of the solar system, and then they find out what's outside the solar system. I'm not giving too much away to say they do get out of the solar system, and then they find out what's on the other side of the space-time tunnel, and that hopefully will set up more books in the series going forward.
It's one of those kind of heist stories where you get the main premise, and then he comes up with this crazy plan. The main character comes up with this crazy plan that just sounds completely ridiculously impossible. So of course he's immediately going to jump on it. But you mentioned the humorous side, and from talking to you before and reading your World Shaper books, you are great with one-liners. Is that the way your brain works? Are you like that in regular conversation, or do you put a lot of thought when you're writing into the humor and the one-liners?
I can't say I put a lot of thought into it. It just comes out as I type. So okay. I guess that's just the way my brain works. It's a lot of the humor. It's a little different in the World Shapers because it was with a main character whose parallels our world up until 10 years ago. So she has all these same pop culture references that most people have, and she could make jokes about them. I still sneak some of those in, but they only come out through the cat, who, because he's really an AI, has all the data in the world's solar system's databases at his beck and call. And he keeps making references to old pop culture that he's the only one that gets, but readers will get it too. So that's how I did that this time. But yeah, no, I don't. It's not like I plan that stuff out. It's just once I get into the flow of the character, most of it is first person, though not all of it. Most of it's in Coop's point of view. He's the main character. That's just the voice that comes out, and yeah, I don't plan it. I just write it.
Okay, you're as surprised as we are. Can you talk a little bit more about Coop and what about him as this slightly unsavory but likable main character? What about him will resonate with readers?
I think he is likable. It's true that he has an interesting background. He grew up in a religious orphanage on Luna, which didn't really take. And then he was in a state orphanage. And as he said, he learned all the things that the religious orphanage wished he wouldn't learn there, and made good use of them. And then he had a mentor that helped him get out of that world. So, but he's always been on kind of the wrong side of the law, and always very good at breaking into things. And he calls it pre-salvage now that he's a salvager, which is just another word for theft. But he says, well, everything ends up as salvage eventually if you wait long enough. He's just jumping the gun a little bit. So he's just salvaging it from the from the future. But he does have his code of ethics. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. He's never killed anybody. He doesn't want to kill anybody. And he loves his cat, which they rescued. He and Lisa, the other main character, the lunar cop, rescued from a terrorist organization. That short story is actually it's told in the novel, but there's a whole short story version of it in Shapers of Worlds Volume 2, the second anthology that I kickstarted that kind of introduced these characters. So I think he's likable, and even though he's a bit under the law, it's not like he's out to... Mostly he steals from people who are already stealing from people, because he's in a very corrupt society. So he does have a certain code of ethics, and he's a nice guy, but he will do and say anything to survive, pretty much.
Well, and he's also placed in contrast to Galeotto, who is, kind of the bad guy of the book. And he's definitely got more of a code of ethics than that character.
Galeotto is a megalomaniac who thinks the universe revolves around him and should revolve around him. And he will do anything to advance his own cause. And he doesn't care whether he kills people along the way. Yeah.
And so it's told mainly, as you said, from Coop's point of view, but there are other points of view, one of which is Galeotto, that come in periodically. Did you start out to write from multiple points of view, or did that evolve as you wrote?
I think I may have originally thought it would be first person only, but the trouble with first person is, of course, that you are constrained to that one person's viewpoint, and the only thing you can describe are things that he sees. And I had already kind of gotten in the habit in the World Shapers books of having one main character who wrote in first person, and then other characters that you experience in third person. And it seemed to work well. So that may be why I fell into that, because I'd already done it for the last 3 books, even though they were in a different series. But it does offer you the opportunity of opening up the story, telling things that your main character can't see. Lisa could have potentially been in first person as well, but I just felt I would keep her in third person, and I think it worked well. And Galeotto, I would never could have made him. It could have been all first person, but I think it works better this way. That little bit of distancing from the third person sections, and also it can enhance the suspense a little bit, I guess, because if somebody is being talked about in third person, you don't know that they have survived up to the moment when the story is being told. Whereas the first person character, whatever else happens, unless it's a supernatural character and he's speaking from beyond the grave, that he's going to survive.
Each chapter also starts with an entry from the AI, the cat's diary, journal, what have you, log. I kind of want that whole thing. Can we just have that published from the cat's point of view?
I have actually asked if I can do that. under the terms of the contract, and I can. The question is whether I could sell it or not, but I can pull all those things out and make them into a little book, and I just might do that and maybe add some more. Tybalt's Private Log, Reflections from a Feline Starship Captain. So.
I love it. I would read it. I don't know. I just love the cat. And he's such a cat. He's AI, but he's also got that cat mentality of like, I'm a cat and you're a human and you should do whatever I say.
Oddly enough, I'm reading a book right now after having written this. There's a book by John Gray about the philosophy of cats. And it kind of talks about all that kind of stuff, and it ties in really well. But I wrote all the cat stuff is just because I've always known cats and have a cat, or he has me, the aforementioned Shadowpaw. So, and Tybalt is, in my mind, he looks a lot like our cat. So, oddly enough.
Mm-hmm. Time once again for another break in the podcast, but when we come back, we'll be talking about research that goes into writing sci-fi. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with Edward Willett. We are talking about his sci-fi novel, The Tangled Stars. How about research? When you write sci-fi, how much research do you do? How much sort of, I don't want to say making up, but I mean, you know, there's a certain amount of making up that you have to do that's based on the research. So how does that work for you?
This one was largely made up. I mean, I've written science fiction for a long time, so I have a general idea of how to do the space travel end of things. But again, when I first started writing it, I thought I'd be a bit more on that. I was probably influenced by The Expanse, which I'd watched, and, you know, the gravity situation, and you only have gravity under acceleration and all of that sort of thing. And then I realized, no, that wasn't the story I wanted to tell. So because I'm already giving a totally made up super technology for flying through these space-time tunnels, I decided that one side effect of that was artificial gravity. So my ships could have artificial gravity and people could walk around in them. So that was not exactly research. That was just hand waving. I did do a couple of things, like there's a section set on Mars, and I actually set it where the last Perseverance, I guess, touched down. And I think it was Perseverance. Wasn't that the last one? But anyway, it's in that crater. So there's even a little museum to the lander there in Mars City. And there's something set on, I think it's Io, surface of Io, where Galeotto was. And I researched that to see, you know, get an idea of what that would look like and all that sort of thing. But those are just kind of as they come up. I will do some research. The ship that they steal is in Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry, which I've been to, but I've made it up in that it's all stuff that's been built since the present day. So the old museum is still there, and the U-boat. If people are familiar with that museum, they have a U-boat in the basement, which is quite a surprise when you see it for the first time. I did make reference to that, but I wasn't able to work it in the actual scene. But you know, so that wasn't exactly research either. It was just something I was familiar with. So mostly on something like this, I'm just researching the bits and pieces along the way that I need to know in order to make things believable.
Mm-hmm. When you see, I'm fascinated by all of the images that are coming from the James Webb Telescope. They're so amazing and vivid. When you see pictures like that, does it inspire you for future sci-fi storylines or anything?
Well, images of the stars have always inspired me. That's one reason I wrote science fiction to begin with, and one reason I was always interested in science. Of course, the thing with the James Webb Telescope images is that to the naked eye, it wouldn't look like that at all. The images aren't nearly that bright to the naked eye if you could somehow be out there, which is something that we don't really think about, but they do mention it sometimes in the coverage of it. But all the same, it's still amazing. The images are amazing, and that sort of thing, that sort of the grandeur of the universe and the vastness of the universe is certainly something that I thought about as quite a young kid. I had a telescope, and I'd be out there looking up at the stars. So all of that was inspiration for me beginning and reading and writing science fiction, I think. And so that's just carried down. As I often say, my first short story I ever wrote, complete short story, I probably wrote unfinished things before that. I was 11 years old, something to do on a rainy day, and I wrote a short story called Castor Glass Hypership Test Pilot. So I was already heading out to the stars at the age of 11.
I love it. Do you still have it?
It's somewhere, and the minute I find it, it's going online. But I think it got put into a storage box, and I'm not sure where the box is. So.
Oh, no. When you write, do you tend to, like for this story, did you have the story arc in mind, or was Coop as the main character what popped into your head first? How does that generally work for you in terms of like inspiration for the starting place of a book or a series of books?
It always depends on the book. There's a lot of different starting places. It can be an image. My novel, The City Born, it was an image of this vast metal building or city that had been there with people living in it for so long that it had filled up this canyon over which it kind of crouches with garbage. That was the image. And it turned into a science fiction story. I also wrote a synopsis of it where it was a fantasy novel instead. So that came from that idea. For this one, it was a bit more cold-blooded. I wanted a potential series. I wanted something that would enable me to visit a lot of different worlds. And I wanted those worlds to be very different from each other. And so I came up with the backstory. I've always liked the idea, and I've done it before in a way. I've had even The City Born is kind of set in a universe where there was interstellar travel, but for whatever reason, the ships have stopped coming to this particular planet. I've done that a couple of times in different ways. So that is something that's always intrigued me. So it was a version of that. And then it was just, I wanted something that was flying around the solar system. So all those things, I just kind of threw that into my brain and came up with this backstory. Coop, I don't know where he came from. I knew I wanted the cat. I wanted like a humorous sidekick something, and I decided on a cat. And then Coop, I knew I wanted to kick things off by someone discovering that the MAST network had reopened. So I needed a person who would be out there for some reason and kind of unexpectedly come across that, which I think led me to the idea of someone who's a salvage hunter. And then it all just flowed from there it's always a process of self-interrogation where you ask yourself questions about the situation that you started with. And as you ask yourself those questions, more questions open up and the answers start to give you characters and plot and all that stuff. I synopsized the whole thing because it was sold to DAW Books on the basis of the proposal. And then I haven't looked back at the original proposal, but usually what happens is that it deviates wildly from what I originally put in the proposal as I write it.
I don't want to give anything away, but it's very open-ended. So we're clearly going to see these characters again. Do you have an arc in mind, or a certain number of books that you're contracted for? How many do you think we'll see?
This is a one-off as far as the contract goes at the moment. So I'm waiting to hear if they want. They're probably waiting to see how it sells. This one's only an ebook. It's not coming out in print, which is new for me. And so we'll see. Ebooks can sell very well, and I hope this one does, and that I can therefore write another one. If I didn't write it for Daw, I might very well carry on the story, because of course there are many ways to continue writing your series now, even if the publisher decides it doesn't want to continue it. So I certainly plan to continue the story. The only arc is that I know what's going on. Obviously, again, without giving anything away, there's kind of a almost literally a deus ex machina at the end, which sets up what's going on. And I've set it up at the end so that my characters are going to be flying around and exploring new worlds, which was kind of my whole premise to begin with. But how many books that would take, I don't know. There's no set number of books, but I do know how it ends.
And time for our final break of the podcast. When we come back, I will be talking about what else Edward has been working on. He is definitely plenty busy. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Edward Willett. What else have you been working on? I know that you just sent another World Shaper novel somewhere. I can't remember where, but what else have you been working on?
Well, this is the most recent novel. I have a middle grade book that there is a publisher that has expressed considerable interest in, but they haven't said yes yet. So I'm waiting for that, and hopefully that'll come along soon. It's called Fireboy, and it's a middle grade novel, present day middle grade novel that involves elementals, which was a lot of fun to write. So that's out there. I've got a grant from the Saskatchewan Arts Board to write a nonfiction book, which will be about writing. So I'll be drawing on all the interviews I've done with the podcast, and pulling together my thoughts on it as well. So I'll be working on that this fall more than anything else. And then there's always, there's also a young adult kind of, it's not really werewolves, but is Shape Changers novel that I've been working on for quite a while. It was supposed to be published by a publisher that went out of business before they got around to it, but I'm going to finish that up and then hope to find a publisher for that. And as I said, as far as Daw goes, I'm just waiting to hear what they would like to see next, if it'll be something new or if they want to see something in the Tangled Stars universe. I'm just waiting to find out. All the publishing stuff is keeping me busy, though, too.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah, you definitely got plenty on your plate.
The publishing stuff really sucks up your time.
I imagine. How about the picture book? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that came out of the blue. Len Harley, who's a life coach, is kind of what she does. She had this idea for a picture book, and she was also planning to do a bike ride across much of Canada to support a mental health charity called jack.org, which is mainly focused on youth mental health. Because of some family history of her own, she had a strong personal connection to that. And she came to me in April and said, I'm looking for a publisher for this book. And, as a picture book, it's just a little bit of text. And, oh, by the way, I want it in June when I'm setting up on this. And usually these things take months and months and months, but she provided the text, she provided the pictures, and I was able to get that book out there in time for her bike ride, which is over now. But the book is out there, and she'll be promoting it through everything she does. And it's a nice little book. It's called What If You Could, and it's about a caterpillar that's wants to turn into a butterfly, but he's suffering from self-doubt, and he has to decide which voice to listen to, the little one that says, you can never be a butterfly, or the one that says, no, you'll make a great butterfly. And he chooses to go with the positive voice and becomes a butterfly. I don't think that's much of a spoiler when you're dealing with a caterpillar story. So yeah, that's how that came about. It was quite by surprise, but I've done enough work with Shadowpaw Press now that I know how to get books into the system, get them into all the bookstore websites and all that sort of thing. The challenge is always getting distribution to big bookstore chains, and I'm still working on that. But as far as getting them out so that they're available everywhere, I'm able to do that. So I was able to do that for her, and I'm very proud of the book. And it was a new direction for me, for sure. As has been some other things I've done. I published a middle grade novel in verse called Stay by Catherine Lawrence, an award-winning, it's really a poetry book, but it's a middle grade novel as well. And I've got a poetry book coming up that explores gender and sexuality from a poet in Saskatoon, Belinda Betker, who, again, her publisher went under, as did publisher Stay, which was one of my publishers as well, Cato Books. I'm probably going to be taking on another Cato book, literary historical novel coming up. I've got a young adult outdoor adventure called The Emir's Falcon by Matthew Hughes, who is a science fiction fantasy writer, but this is not a science fiction book. And a historical novel set in Saskatchewan that combines horses and professional women's baseball called Thickwood. And that's coming up very soon, too. So Shadowpaw Press is very, very busy.
It sounds like it. Do you sleep?
Yes. I'm always feeling my concern with the publishing, and I love doing it, and I'm going to keep doing it, but the concern is always that it does cut into my writing time. So I'm trying to carve out every day for myself. The first thing I'm going to do every day is my goal. The first thing I do every day is write something of my own, and then all the other stuff, the administrative stuff and all that, comes in later in the day. I think that's the way I have to do it if I'm going to be happy, because I'm not happy when I'm not writing fiction.
Mm-hmm. Do you find time to read things from your personal TBR, or are you mostly reading for the podcast and publishing and other things?
I read a little bit every day. I'm not reading anything new at the moment. I'm reading Steve Sterling, S.M. Sterling's Emberverse series, and I think there's 15 books, and I'm just into book 7, so I've got a ways to go there. But I love the premise of that, and I had him on the show. I've got other books by people who I've had on the show that often I'll just read a little bit, and then I have to interview them. I don't get the book read before I interview them. The ones that I really like, then I try to carry on later. But yeah, I don't read as much as I would like. Outside of all the stuff that I read, if you know what I mean. I don't read as much fiction for enjoyment as I once did, for sure, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Understandable. You have a website, you have a podcast, you've got social media. Can you talk about where people can find all of that?
Well, my website is edwardwillett.com, just my name with .com at the end. It's a very complete website. It has a ton of stuff on it. I keep it reasonably updated. At one point, I was blogging more, and now I don't do that. I more just post news items when I have something or some news in the blog portion of it. But it also has, for example, all my science columns that I wrote for years and years for newspapers are on there. And there's some fiction bits, and there's music, and I'm not even sure anymore. So that's my main website and best place to find me. However, Shadowpaw Press has its own website at shadowpawpress.com, which has you can see all the stuff that I'm publishing, and it has some of my stuff there as well that I've published. I also have a online shop called edwardwillettshop.com, which is where you go if you want autographed books. I have The World Shapers, which is the podcast, has a website, which is theworldshapers.com, and that's where you can find links to all of the past episodes, all 116 of them at this point. And then on social media, I'm on Twitter at @ewillett. I'm on Instagram at Edward Willett Author. I'm on LinkedIn. I never think of that one, but I am. And I'm on, what have I forgotten? Facebook at edward.willett. I'm also on YouTube. youtube.com/Edward Willett. I do post occasional things related to writing. I also post music because I sing and I'm a stage performer. And I also post my daily walks around Regina. That's my most recent thing. I live stream my walks around my hometown, and then they're posted there. So I have over 500 subscribers now who are mostly there to join me on these walks a little bit around Regina. So that's kind of cool. Shadowpaw Press is on Twitter at Shadowpaw Press and on Instagram at Shadowpaw Press. And the World Shapers is also on Twitter at the World Shapers. Oh, and they're both on Facebook as well at Shadowpaw Press and the World Shapers. I think that's everything.
I really don't think you have enough social media presence. I think everybody, all three of those now need TikTok.
Oh, I've thought about TikTok, and my daughter, who's college age, says, "No, Dad, you don't want to be on TikTok."
It's a time suck. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Or at least she doesn't want me on TikTok. I'm not sure that's quite the same thing.
Could go either way. Well, Edward, we've talked about the new book, The Tangled Stars. We've talked about writing, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to mention at this point?
I think that has covered most of it. I always try to sneak in everything as I go along the way in case I don't get asked about it. So I think I did that pretty good with Shadowpaw Press and all of that. So, yeah, I think that covers what I'm up to these days. Well, I'm auditioning for an acting job, so I do that on the side as well. But it's just an audition, so I don't know if I'll get that or not.
Oh well, good luck, or break a leg, whichever. I don't know if you say that for an audition or not.
That's a good question. You certainly say break a leg before you go on stage, but I think you can say good luck for an audition.
Okay, yeah, you'll have to ask other actors for me because I'm not sure.
As long as you don't mention the Scottish play, you're okay.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, especially about the Tangled Stars. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me on again. I enjoyed it.
Thank you once again to Edward for not only joining me on the podcast, but making his third appearance on the podcast. If you haven't done so already, his World Shaper series is really fun. It is... Well, you should check out those interviews. They are interviews 193 and 258. 193, we talk about the first book in that series. 258, we talk about the second book in that series, so you can start wherever you would like. But I think they're a lot of fun because each book goes to a different world that has been created by these world shapers, and that is a very tiny explanation for a much broader series of books, but they're a lot of fun, very well written, lots of, as Edward said at some point in this interview, lots of cultural references thrown in if that's something that you enjoy when you are reading. So also, if you are a fan of sci-fi, especially sci-fi, space opera, then you would definitely want to check out The Tangled Stars. Again, you've got some great one-liners. You've got a snarky cat. Really, where can you go wrong with a snarky cat in space? And you've got this... It's not a heist novel, but it has a heist adventure embedded within the story, and then you have a larger adventure around that. You've got a bit of a morally ambiguous main character who is also very likable, and lots of interesting side characters. A villain who is very easy to know that he is not morally ambiguous, and so he's very easy to just dislike right away. But lots of great elements within this story. So if you are a fan of sci-fi, then definitely check out The Tangled Stars. Thank you, as always, to you, my guests. I hope that you will join me for my next interview. We are switching back to nonfiction for the next interview. I'll be interviewing Kelly Skoloda, and I'm probably saying that right. I'm just going to apologize. Oh, no, I did it. Yes, Skoloda. Skoloda, just so you know. And then I'll ask her how to pronounce that. But we'll be talking about her book. It's called A Way Back to Health, and it talks about her journey through cancer, as a cancer survivor, etc., and some of the lessons that she learned through that process. So I'll be talking to her on the next episode. I hope that you will join me. As always, if you are a fan of this podcast and you are so inclined, it really helps us if you leave a review, written or starred. If you like, follow, subscribe, do all those great things on whatever platform you listen to this podcast, and also follow on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Love hearing from you. So find me in some place that you use social media and are willing to interact. I would love to hear what you're reading. Thank you again to Edward. Thank you, as always, to you. Again, I hope you're having a great week so far. My wish for you is the same as it always is at the end of the podcast, and that is for your time, whether that's today, the week, the month, whatever, but that your time involves lots and lots of opportunities for you to get yourself lost in many, many good books. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.